All right, so welcome everyone to our AMA, Ask Me Anything with Phil Owen, who is a former president of COTESOL, in addition to our past national treasurer, our past international conference program chair, and he's performed a whole bunch of volunteer work and services for COTESOL in general while he was in Korea over the, 17 years you were in Korea?
17 years in Korea.
Yeah, so Phil has been, he's done everything, he's seen it all, done it all, and I'm really excited to welcome him here today. So thank you for joining us, Phil.
Well, you're welcome. I'm very flattered. And I have no idea what to talk about.
That's all right. I've got a million
I have nothing
questions.
prepared. I have nothing prepared.
That's actually perfect. First, you're joining us from Portland, Oregon, right?
Yes.
And so how's the COVID situation going there?
Portland, I mean, Oregon handled it relatively well. That is, they closed down as much as possible. The governor was keeping people indoors. It has opened up some, both statewide and in the city, but we keep getting spikes and people worried. It is the governor, yes, has mandated masks inside when you're inside any building with other people or other than your home. And that seems to have taken pretty well, at least in Portland. Now, you know, Oregon has the west side and the east side, and they can be very different. And I don't know much about the other parts of Oregon. I haven't lived here long. So it may be a little different in other places, but so far, people in Portland seem to be rolling with the punches pretty well.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely heard, I've heard a little bit of Oregon's history, and I know that Portland is far more progressive than the rest of it. So.
Yeah, I think that's generally true. But the other, another interesting part to the Oregon history is it was settled as a whites-only state.
Right, that's what I've heard. And it was that way until sometime in the 20th century even, wasn't it? They actually had records on the books.
So. Yeah, and they had curfews and you know, restrictions for the, you know, we have a Chinatown in downtown because that's where the Chinese had to live.
Wow.
And a lot like that. So there is a history. And if you remember a few years ago, a group of armed white militia types took over a national park.
Right, I've heard about that.
They were from Oregon, and that was in Oregon. It was way the other side of the state. But yeah, so there is kind of a weirdness sometimes, and yeah.
It sounds like a lot of the United States actually. You have the very progressive enclaves or the cities, and you have the rest of the state where people are just very different.
Yeah, I think that's true. Portland has grown a lot in 10 or 15 years, and you know, the old established Portlanders, you know, who were here more than 15 years, just keep complaining about all the changes that are happening. But they do keep happening. So
what kind of changes?
Oh, I think just the culture changes and building, you know, just expanding the city and the building. I'm sure stuff like the homelessness, because it's bad.
Oh, really?
It's oh yeah, it's bad here. And you know, just the general change in the atmosphere and the what do you call it? The general culture. It's much more a youth culture, or at least a whole lot of younger people well, we would have called them countercultural a while ago, but I'm not sure that they are exactly, which makes it an interesting place, you know, and but I could see it would be little disruptive for people who didn't necessarily buy into that. It does, however, make their property values go skyrocket. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Actually, I was going to do this kind of chronologically, or I had
Okay.
that in my head, but I'm really curious now. Why Oregon?
Oh, my daughter moved here
Okay.
before I came to, or she moved to the West Coast,
Mhm.
and sometime up in Washington and then down here, but she's been here for probably 15 years.
Okay.
And so when I moved back, it was kind of like, I could go back to Omaha or I could go to Portland, Omaha or Portland, you know, it,
Mhm.
um, and I didn't have, I have friends in Omaha still, but they weren't, that compelling to go back to Omaha as opposed to come here with family.
Mhm.
So that's why Portland, as well as it's an interesting place. Seemed like it would be a fun place to land.
So you're enjoying it so far?
I am, yeah, yeah, yeah. And there's no snow. Well, very, very little snow.
Right. I've heard it's very mild there.
It's mild, yeah.
Probably why you have such a big homeless population. If
I'm
you're
sure
going to be
that's part
homeless
of it.
somewhere. Yeah.
I'm sure that's part of it. Yeah.
So have you seen a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests there, or happened upon
Some,
anything?
and I mean, if you're looking at some news reports, you would assume that the whole city is in flames, and that's just not it. The major protest for a long time was all downtown, very, very much centered on the Justice Center,
Mhm.
kind of the police headquarters and that kind of thing. Um, and the violence came when the police pushed back for no apparent reason other than to push back.
Mhm.
These were not riots.
Right.
Looting was not a big issue. The downtown stores did board up their windows. They still are boarded up, but I mean, that is probably more a precaution than it is because the window's gone.
Mhm.
Um, and so there was there was a lot of reaction to George Floyd's murder. And
Right.
uh, I have been partly just because it's a very different part of town, and partly because, I'm old and there's COVID.
Mhm.
I didn't go to a whole lot of those. I didn't go to any of the major downtown things that looked like they were going to be violent.
Mhm.
But I did go on a march in another part of town that was going to be very low keyed, and it was much smaller.
Mhm.
But I did do that, and then something else. Oh, I think there was a few rally. There was another rally downtown that was smaller. It was kind of earlier in the day. The difficult stuff happens at 11, 12 o'clock at night.
Oh, sure.
So it was evening but earlier, and that was all very uneventful in many ways.
Mhm.
Um, uh, so I've known about it. I've seen it. I went. Um, uh, a church opened a respite center downtown. So I mean, if you're downtown protesting, you get hit by gas, you can walk up a block or two and get some help because it was relatively close to the major confrontation.
Well,
And I
that's
did go
nice.
sit there once
Mhm.
to just kind of, see people come in and out, but nothing too weird. But we did hear the tear gas explode,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, because it was just a couple blocks away. They were shooting tear gas. They were doing all
Jeez.
that. Shortly after that, the Black Lives Matter organizers then changed their tactics, and they started going to different parts of town at the same time.
Oh, interesting.
So
Smart.
the major downtown protests kind of died down, and things happened at other police stations around town,
Mhm.
which of course split up the police force also, and uh, brought out different parts of town. Um, this weekend, I heard the Proud Boys are in town as
Oh,
counter-protesting. And that they were expecting to get rather, and they may have been here last week too. So yes, there has been some escalation in the last week or two. But I don't know that, I don't know how bad that's gotten, but it's not the Black Lives Matter people, but it's the Proud Boys are coming in from all over the West Coast, I think, and which they do annually.
oh, really?
But yeah, they just have rallies downtown, you know. But
Wow.
um, uh, this time, I think that there is definitely an anti. So I don't know how bad that actually got, but it could get kind of nasty,
Right. Oh,
dicey, as the Brits would say.
right.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like we're living in very interesting times.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Um, yeah.
but you've had, I was reading the biography, the biographical
Uh-huh.
profile you sent to us. You've had a very interesting life
Oh,
yourself. So for those people who didn't look at your biographical profile, can you tell us a little bit about how you ended up in ELT and how you eventually ended up in Korea?
ah. Actually, the ELT was kind of just a discovery. When I was in college, um, just kind of bouncing around, not really knowing what to do or where to go with all that. The uh, and I was a language major and stuff like that, and doing all the humanities stuff. And there was a poster on a wall, and I mean, these things I guess work, and it said, get a MAT sol. And I thought, wow, that's an interesting concept. Yeah, maybe that would be a good idea. And so I didn't go to that program, but I kept that idea in mind. And then after college, that was Air Force time. So, and after Air Force, it was grad school time, and I went to UCLA then for 2 years. Uh, UCLA at that time, there were only about 4 or 5 programs in the whole country.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I
Wow.
think, I mean, I'm sure you could probably find more, but I mean, if you want to talk about there was Michigan, Illinois, UCLA, there, USC,
Mhm.
there really weren't a whole lot. So yeah, I was there. Marianne Seltz-Mercia was my grammar teacher.
Oh, wow.
Um, I could drop a few other names, but you'd have to be older to know them. Uh, Schumann, John Schumann was SLA, and Stephen Krashen came to do a guest lecture and that kind of
Wow.
thing. So it was kind of a heady time, um, and so I finished. I did that, and then went back to Omaha, or went to Omaha and started teaching some. Uh, that's not a good gig.
Oh, really?
I think people should know that. No, it's not.
Okay, why not?
If you're in public school, K-12, then you have a good job with indexed raises and that kind of thing. That's fine. If you're one of the 2 or 3 people in like a junior college or community college who actually get there full time and kind of become the dean of the department, that's good.
Mhm.
But the rest is all very part-time, haphazard. Um, it's good moonlighting.
Mhm.
And even now here in Portland, I know people, they're working here and they're working there. And um, it's just not something that want to bet the mortgage on.
Right.
Uh, and it was pay wise, it was good for moonlighting, but it wasn't really, you know, it's not, that kind of specialized training is just not valued. There are far too many people who just happen to say, hey, I want to teach, or yeah, I could do that. And you may or may not find a program director who understands the difference, or that kind of thing. So yeah, it worked okay for a while, and then I got a real job, a day job, and taught at night and that kind of thing. And then eventually, about 1999, after other changes, the situation just changed. I was working. The job I had was changing and downsizing, and it wasn't as helpful. And not the teaching job, other jobs. And importantly, my daughter moved from Omaha, where I was helping, where we were together. She moved to the coast to finish school. She was a young adult and hardly wanted me looking over her shoulder all the time. So I thought, well, I'll take this background, I'll take this degree, and I'll go do what sounds exciting and interesting and go abroad. And I sent 6 or 7 resumes around the world. Kunsan National University bit with a reasonable package and a seeming, and pretty quickly. And I asked a Korean student on campus. I was running around the campus in Omaha. And he said, well, this is a good school, and the food is good here in Kunsan, in Cholabukdo. He said, well, the food's good there. So I came to Korea, assuming I would be there 1 year. And
yeah.
Yeah, keep my finger on the pulse and try to find a place to go back to that would be a more normal. And actually, the first year was not a lot of fun. And then I moved from the Unaguan to the department. The Canadian guy they had, who was their full-time person in the department, moved back to Canada, and so I kind of slipped in that way and stayed in the department, which was a much better setting, much more interesting. And
how was it more interesting? How were the two scenarios different?
Well, the first year was all non-credit, basically Hagwon kind of teaching. Wasn't kids, fortunately. It was adults and young adults and college students. So in a way that was interesting, but the administration and the confusions around it, and it was a new program. They didn't know what they were doing. And we had some people who were helping with it, some of the Korean staff who did not see eye to eye. And so getting into the department where there was, you had to kind of come up with a program, you had to kind of come up with an idea of why are we doing this class and who's going to be in it. Just everything gelled. Much lower contact hours, much more preparation time, but many fewer contact hours. And as well as more collegial rapport with the Korean professors and that sort of thing. So it was a nicer fit, and it was just turned out to not be a particularly good time to come back to the States. And they kept showing me contracts, and they kept giving me raises, and I kept signing the contracts. And pretty soon there was no way to go. I was making enough money that you can't just leave it and start someplace new, and I was old enough that that would have been very difficult. So I stayed there until I hit Korean retirement age,
Mm-hmm.
and which I knew was coming. I mean, obviously, and I had very fortuitously. I actually don't really understand how this happened, other than divine intervention or something. But I was in I was in Bangkok about a year, about the summer before, um, and I met up with a kid who was a fellow, the English special, not specialist, the what do they call those?
The English language fellow?
That one, yes, the English language. He was an English language fellow, which is something I knew nothing about.
Mm-hmm.
Although looking back on it, I've run across a few, but didn't really understand it. But at any rate, he told me about that program and outlined all about it. And uh, so when I got back to Korea, then I started that application process, so that when the job ended in Korea in August, the job started in Myanmar in September.
Oh, wow.
And it was a real good segue. You know, I didn't even come back to the States, just flew from Incheon to to Yangon.
Wow.
So uh, and that was a real fun couple of years.
Right, so the English language fellow program is through the U.S. Embassy, just for people who aren't familiar with it, right?
Right, it's a U.S. State Department program. They send, I want to say, close to 200 people a year. Maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's more like 250. To I think up to 100 and something, 25 or so countries.
Mhm.
The first year I was in Myanmar, we had 5, all spread out, all doing different things. And the second year, they cut that down to only about 2 or 3, and then a few more have followed on. There was a special program that had a few people in it, and that program ended. Um, but yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity. A lot of um, public school teachers who could take a year off would go as a fellow and then go back to their jobs, and then a few people like me who were between jobs, and a few people who had to come back and find jobs. Um, but it's great. It's so varied. It's all teaching and teacher training, lots of teacher training. Um, and I was each setting is very different, and each setting is developed by the embassy, the people in the cultural department in the embassy, with the along with the local people, to say where do we need help and where can we be the most impactful. Um, uh, so uh, it was pretty amazing. Really good people to work with. I mean, other elves are quality people. They're all quality people, and that was good, with good experience and level heads, pretty much. Couple of goofies, but you know, it's a big group. So I ended up in Myanmar, or Burma, which I think officially we still call Burma, but sometimes they call it Myanmar. It's the same place.
Mhm.
Um, uh, and in the new capital of Naypyidaw, which is just kind of a mind-blowing experience. That, yeah, I mean, it's a bizarre place. If you Google it, you'll see all kinds of drone footage about you know, highways, or I mean streets with 10, 20 lanes and free cars, that
Oh,
kind of
gosh.
thing.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Interesting.
but I was working with government ministry employees did a lot of office work and telephone answering, that kind of education, and also with the parliament support group, the people who were doing the research for, the parliamentarian has a question, they do the research or dig up facts, that kind of thing. They also coordinate a lot internationally, so we worked with them. Also worked with, they had a English language proficiency school, which was supposed to help all those people work, but the school wasn't working well. So I went and worked with that school for a while too. The fun stuff, really was working with the parliamentarians, because we did some logic and argumentation work. It was kind of an extra to their job and an extra to my job, but it was a lot of fun. When they were in session, I would meet 10, 12 senators and representatives, and we'd talk about things or do some logic problems or discuss and that kind of thing. That was really cool. Those were some really cool people, several of who had spent considerable time in prison.
Interesting.
Yeah, and several who had just kind of laid low for a long time. These were all the civilians, because of course the military is still a big part of the government there. It's a bizarre place.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So do you keep in touch with any of the people you met?
Yes. Actually, it's been pretty easy to keep in touch with the Myanmar. In Myanmar, I assume you mean, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
yeah. Those parliamentarians mostly, because we had a much closer bond, and so yes, I do Facebook with several of them occasionally, or at least read what they're doing. They're all campaigning now. Their election is this year also, so but yeah, to see how they're doing, and I would I did not really want to leave.
Yeah. You were there for 2 years, is that right?
That was 2 years, yeah.
And that's the maximum time for the ELF program?
Right. It's set up to be 1 year or 10 months. It's a 10-month gig. But a few people, if the situation is right and the people are right, do a follow-on year.
Okay.
When I first went there, then a few people were even staying longer, but they've really cut that down, or actually cut it out. So I can't even apply for the position again. They won't even look at the application, because they wanted to spread that around to other people.
Right.
But it's a good program. It is only for U.S. citizens. The British Council has kind of similar programs. There's a Canadian program called CUSO, which I worked with a little bit. I didn't really understand. They do a whole lot of different things, but they do language training also. So our Canadian friends may know something about that or want to. The weird thing, I'm not a great jingoist. I really don't care too much. We could spend a long time critiquing the United States and its history and its myths. We won't. But one of the weird things is, of course, when you're getting paid by the State Department, you have to kind of know the good parts. And I don't think you have to unacknowledge the bad parts, but in my opinion, things like the ELF program is the good part. That is what I think we should be doing more of. And uh, it was kind of weird to hear me say, you know, I'm from the U.S. Embassy, and because I was always mistaken as British consul.
Really?
Everybody would say, "Oh, yeah, we're at the British Council." No, not the British Council,
Why would they think you were from the British Council? Was that just more
because
common
they
there?
were every place.
Okay.
The British Council was there were a lot of people there teaching English also who were British Council people. And I just thought, no, wait a minute. This is the one program. It's not the one program, but it's one of the programs that, you know, that, you know, might actually be good. So, yeah. So I had to kind of promote the US that way, which was a little strange for me.
Yeah. Well, that's actually something I did want to ask about, you know, because knowing you, you weren't necessarily in agreement with the current administration in the United States, or
Uh,
maybe even with the administration currently in, you know, Burma. So I was wondering, like, what that delicate line might have
uh,
been.
um, one nice thing about, I think, a lot of Burmese people is that they're not they're not quite so fooled.
Mm,
They know what they went through, you know, and this is very living memory for them. The oppression and the um, imprisonment and the torture and the disappearings. That's all. That's all real to them,
mm,
and it's not something that I would want to, you know, emphasize or talk about or teach them about because I didn't have to.
mm,
Um, and also, it just wouldn't be heard. I mean, you know, there's only so much. But then when I could say, well, you know, this is what we say we do, or this is what we really did, or this is what happened during the Bush Gore election or something like that.
mhm.
This is how that happened. Or I was there when Trump was elected, which was just a bizarre thing. I mean, in terms of electoral colleges and all that kind of thing.
Right.
You know, I could try to at least explain it and hopefully not dwell on it, but not sugarcoat it.
Right.
Um, uh, what you don't do is, you know, you have to be very careful about criticizing
Mm,
Dawn Suu Kyi. Um, and because she is, I mean, there's a lot of good to say about her. And she is very much the focus of the future of Myanmar.
mhm.
So let that happen. I mean, I was there when the Rohingya problem and the Rakhine went and they were all pushed out and that kind of thing. And that got a little dicey. Um, People trying to justify that or buying into the army's um, propaganda.
Mhm.
And you know, you're sitting in the parliament building talking to people who work with the parliament, and you have to say, well, what about?
Right.
And yeah, and rather than talk about the legitimacy of the Rohingya living in Myanmar, which is a big question for the Burmese people. Well, you have half of people living in the mud in Cox's Bazar.
Mm,
It doesn't matter, you know, their statehood or their citizenship. The way I could approach it, the way I felt I could approach it, was to say, regardless of their legitimacy, regardless of their citizenship, those, you know, it's a humanitarian crisis.
right.
And
Right.
so how do we look past into that humanitarian crisis? And that was kind of how I tried to look at it, because I think people could talk about that.
Mhm.
Um,
Right.
the resolution of it is still not resolved. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, that was the touchy part. Yeah.
Right. Oh, I can imagine. Can you walk us through a typical day? Like, first of all, you were staying in a hotel, right? So you wake up in the hotel, and what did you do? A
Um,
five-star hotel,
a
right? You mentioned
five-star hotel. I think it was five. Maybe it was four, 4.5.
super
Um,
nice. Anyway, we'll go with that.
uh, Napido is set up in zones. So there's the government zone. There's a place for the government workers to live. There's a buying and selling zone, and there's a hotel zone.
Mm,
And when I was there, I think it may be changing a little bit now, but when I was there, foreigners had to stay in the hotel zone.
really?
It was required, yeah,
Wow.
by law. And so I had a per diem
Mm,
and I just went to, I went to several hotels, checked them out, decided which one I wanted to go to, and negotiated some kind of price that was under my housing allowance. And so, yes, I did not have a kitchenette. I did get a bigger room because I also used it as office space. So did a lot of in-room officing. Um, and but yeah, there was always a breakfast buffet with made-to-order omelets and sometimes chocolate croissants and
oh, wow.
various things like that. And at least at the hotels I stayed at, I could go back through the line and pack up a lunch pail.
Oh,
I
that's
mean, yeah,
nice.
get those little nesting lunch pails. They were happy for that. And I think that was because historically it was very hard to go get lunch
Mm,
in Nepido. I mean, um, although the ministry's buildings did have lunch facilities, but whether or not we could go or da da da, that was a whole anyway.
oh, interesting. They
Um,
didn't have like little restaurants or carts you could go
there,
nearby?
there, some of them were more developed than others.
Mm,
The each ministry had its own building on its own little fief. I mean, huge amount of land. They were very separated.
wow.
So it wasn't like you would just, how in DC you have, the carts just fill up all the street and you just go to the cart. You you couldn't do that. And then I think there may have been some question about, just sanitation.
Mm,
Um,
sure.
so anyway, the at least the hotels I stayed at were happy to have me pack a little lunch, and then I could probably spread that out with a couple of apples or something,
Mhm.
and eat for the rest of the day. But it was nice, Um, uh, the whatever ministry I was going to first, or whatever the parliament I was going to first, would send a car
Mm,
because it was a distance. There was no mass transportation. They would send a car, so I got driven out to wherever it was I was teaching that morning, and did my hour or two or three or whatever it was, and then uh, somebody would take me to another place or back to the hotel, or whatever the schedule was for that day. It did um, change a lot. I mean, I usually went one place for maybe about a month, and every day for a month or every other day for a month. And then that was just kind of their part, and I went on to do somebody else or another part. Um, I will say the Parliament did have a lunch area that was kind of nice. So um, anyway, so I would do that, and maybe one or two classes or one or two places, and then they would cart me back to the hotel, and I would sit and plan or type or produce stuff. The the ministries and the parliament were very good about photocopying stuff I brought. You know, if I said, here, this is what we're doing today, I need, 20, 30 copies. They were good about that. They were not good about sharing Wi-Fi.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they had it. They all had it. But I think they were afraid of, people abusing the Wi-Fi and doing their shopping or whatever. I think that was the issue. Or they would give me a password, but they wouldn't give the students a password.
So
So
no,
I could
no tech in
access.
the class, basically.
What's that?
No tech for the students to be using.
Very, very little. And some places they did.
Okay.
Some places they were open. They understood the importance of it. They knew it was for learning. I started a Moodle cloud, but it only lasted one class, and that was information. That was the information people. So they had some idea what it was about, but I couldn't just, and then again, these are people who are not getting paid a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't ask them to be spending a lot on that, on minutes for their phone, so that I could do that. But sometimes it was better than others, but a lot of the time I just had to download, whatever, and project it or play it in class. But that was kind of a surprise, because they had the Wi-Fi,
Mm-hmm.
but not for these people. For other people, maybe, I don't know.
Right.
But that was what I did. And then Netflix in the evening, or the heated saltwater infinity pool.
Ooh, that sounds nice.
Yeah, it
That
was
sounds
nice.
really nice.
And that kind of thing. So
The
the
internet there
other,
was fast enough for Wi-Fi?
what's that?
The internet there was fast enough for Netflix?
Yeah.
The Wi-Fi was
Oh,
okay?
well, at my hotels.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Oh,
at the
impressive.
hotels it was. Yeah. I don't know that. I mean, maybe it wasn't as good as other places, or as good as Korea, but very little is.
Yeah.
One of the nice things about living in a hotel like that was you met a whole lot of people, and people who, a lot of NGOs, and other people who were working to develop, or UN people working to develop this or that, and they could kind of fill me in on things, as well as just be interesting people to talk to. Usually international themselves. They weren't all Americans or anything, which was nice. And I got some connections with some places to go teach, and people to work with from that. People who said, "Oh, we need that in this." I do have to say, I'm bragging, but I did develop. Uh, it was the surprise developments that were interesting. The kind of catching wind of the English language proficiency school, just kind of catching wind of it, and then following it up, and then working with those teachers, and then having them bring other teachers in to work with for a while. And then when I left, they put an elf there full time,
Oh, really?
which was, I think, kind of neat. And they brought in a specialist. That's kind of a sibling project or program with the elves. They brought in a specialist to develop a whole curriculum for that school. And I kind of think, well, if I hadn't heard about this, we wouldn't be doing that. And then the same was kind of true with the selective service, or not selective service, the civil service. because the civil service program had an English teaching component in their training program. So they brought their teachers in, and I worked with those people, and uh, found out that they then put a full-time elf in that program, and she was working only, I mean, just with those teachers and I think some other teachers in that training of civil servants, which is
That's cool.
yeah, it was cool. I kind of thought, hey, wait a minute,
Yeah.
I know those people because I worked with them. So yeah, I have to brag about that a little bit.
That's very cool. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, were you able to request a region when you applied to the ELF program or a
Yes.
country? Okay, how did that
Yeah.
work?
I think it's one of those where you pull down and you can say, I want to go to this region, or, and I think it's, I want to go to this region, and then you could give like a paragraph, you know, this is what I'm really interested in. So I did say Southeast Asia, and I did say Myanmar, and I think maybe Thailand or Laos. Um, Almost any place in that area would have been fine, but I was very excited about the Myanmar gig. Um,
Why?
because I'd been there a couple of times, and I had seen it develop some, and I knew some Burmese people to get in touch with, and because because it's such developing so,
Mhm.
and it's so self-aware. Um, I think some other places, either they just aren't that self-aware, or they just can't talk about it,
Mm.
which is could be both.
Mhm.
Uh, but the Burmese are at least able now to talk about their dreams and expectations. Um, I did take a tour of Yangon once. It was kind of a walking tour, and we went up and over a bridge, and the guide said, "Now, right down there is where that Japanese photographer got shot and killed during the Saffron Revolution, because the monks went down this way and then marched down here." I thought, I got chills
Yeah, wow.
of, looking at that kind of history. And then we went around the corner, and he said, "Now this is, in 1988, where the big student demonstration was, and I was there the day before, but I was sick one day, and when I came back the next day, all there were shoes."
Wow. Wow.
So I mean, there's that kind of stuff is still very real, and it's very tangible, um, uh, as well as, you know the lifestyle is just so relaxed, especially compared to Korea. I
Mm.
mean, Korea's so bali, and they don't know what that word means. And that's kind of nice in some ways. In some ways, it's frustrating, of course. But, it's nice to say, I'm going to just go sit in the tea house and talk to my friends.
Mhm.
And, um, and that's normal. That's what is expected. Just go sip some tea and munch on a whatever,
Mhm.
and talk with people. Um, uh, and that's really, really exciting. Uh, Naypyidaw is by bus about 5.5 hours from the bus station in Yangon,
Mm.
after which it's an hour ride to almost anywhere.
Yeah.
And it's probably about 3.5 or 4 hours to Mandalay.
Okay.
Um,
Did you get to travel a lot while you were there?
I traveled some. It's surprisingly not well situated for. I mean, for a capital city that was put in the center, it's not well hubbed. Um, you can fly to Yangon, but you can't fly to Mandalay.
Mm.
Um, so I got to Mandalay several times. I do like Mandalay. I got to Yangon several times, of course. Um, I got to up to Kachin State, to at least the major city in Kachin State. The State Department also has this program of, they call them Access, micro scholarship program, for local people taught by local teachers, local students taught by local teachers. And so we did training with those teachers in Mandalay a couple of times, and I went to see the situation in Michina once, and also in Kale, which is kind of over on the other side. It's Chin territory. And I did some of that and a couple of bus rides, but not as much as I wished. And that was one of the problems with actually any place in Southeast Asia, I think, is between the first year and second year, there was about a 30-day break. And I had, actually it's more than 30 days, it was almost 2 months, 6 weeks or something. And my intention was to go to Yangon, study some Burmese for a while, and then do more traveling. But I had to go to Thailand to renew my visa.
Oh.
So I got there, I studied a little Burmese, and then I had to go, my visa ran out, so I had to go get a new visa. And the foreign affairs people just did not send the paperwork. And I kept emailing the embassy and saying, is the paperwork here? Why can't I get back in? Because I wanted to get back in and see more Myanmar. Yeah. And it just didn't come, and it didn't come, and it didn't come. And I actually had to go extend my visa. I had flown in, so I had 30 days. I had to extend that in Thailand.
Wow.
Because I couldn't get out of Thailand. And I was just sitting in Bangkok for 4 weeks, waiting for this paperwork. And it was a little frustrating. And then while I was in Bangkok, I got this message saying, you know, can you work with the foreign affairs people, the new hires for foreign affairs, as soon as you get back? And I say, yes, if they give me a visa. And it came the next day. Yeah, it came about a day later. And then I got the visa in Bangkok, and then had to go right to Yangon and up to Naypyidaw. And I did not get to do that travel, and I wish I had.
Oh, that's a shame.
I'd been there on tourist visas before, and I'd seen some other parts. Bagan, which is the famous place with all the temples, and a few other places I'd seen. So it's not like I'm totally bereft of Myanmar memories.
Well, I noticed Sean O'Connor has just logged in. I think he probably wants to say hi to you. I'm wondering,
there's Sean.
Yeah, he's here on audio, I think.
Yeah, I don't have a camera. I'm on an old computer.
That's okay.
Hi, Sean.
I apologize. I'm on Corona time here. So actually, I don't have clients on Monday morning, so I tend to have, which is great, but it tends to make it difficult to roll out of bed, even when I put a post note on my alarm clock that Phil Owen's going to be on at 11 o'clock. So here I am, just at the tail end of your discussion. I'm sorry with that. I am up at 6 a.m. for tomorrow morning, but anyways, so Phil, I love the new look.
Oh, thanks.
Doesn't he look very professorial? I was just admiring it earlier.
No, he just looks like you should have a surfboard on a beach in Thailand. That's how you look, man. You should just, anyways, yeah. Anyways, looks good. So I did hear the part about the visa thing. Sorry about that. That's wow. But you're back in the States.
Yeah.
Since 2018.
2018 came back.
And what are you doing in the States? Are you just retired, working? What?
I am technically retired. Just kind of bouncing around a little bit, not doing a whole lot of anything. I am helping with the census this year, which is paid, but not overly much, just enough to keep me out of the house and some kind of extra money. But that'll end of September.
Okay. What's the I know you're from Nebraska, and
Right.
so like, what's the connection to Oregon?
Uh,
I mean,
well,
why end up? Usually, there's a reason why people end up somewhere. I'm just
my
curious.
first response is, have you been to Nebraska? But actually, my daughter moved to the West Coast years ago, and she was in Portland. She's been in Portland about 15 years. So when I was looking around to come back after almost 2 decades, it is a matter of, Omaha with friends or Portland with Jenny. So I came here.
Okay, all right. How far were you from Portland?
I'm in Portland.
Oh, you're in Portland. I just knew it was Oregon. You're in Portland. So hey, gotta love those riots, eh?
All right, I'm going to pause that for just a second because I know we're almost out of time for this.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, first, can we, Phil, can you give us your final thoughts, any tips for people applying to the ELF program or people thinking about transitioning back to the US?
Okay.
And then afterwards, after we finish recording, then we can all three kind of catch up.
Okay.
On our personal
Tips for the ELF program: look carefully at the application. You do not have to take the first thing they throw at you if you don't want to. It is very competitive, so you do have to be aware of that. Flexibility and professionalism are what they look for a lot. Maturity. They need people who can work alone and do a job. For moving back to home, if this is home, this is not the place I left.
Mm.
I left 20 years ago, and the US 20 years ago and the US now are very different places. Omaha and Portland are different places. And, Omaha 20 years ago and Portland now are not the same. So much has changed. I think people don't know. It's from a matter of, how many kinds of milk can you buy to what, I had to go buy a bed, and I had to get a whole new education about beds because they're not the same anymore.
Did you not go home frequently when you lived in Korea?
Yeah, I went home about every year, at least while Dad was alive, and then maybe a little less than that afterwards. But it wasn't the sort of thing I had to, I wasn't making a house by myself or living by myself or anything. It's kind of interesting to go to a potluck and everything is labeled with, this is vegan, this is not vegan, this has gluten, this doesn't have gluten, all of that, which I understand, but it just wasn't what I left. As well as, the whole, I don't want to say political correctness, because that's not right, but the whole people being so very, very conscious of language, of microaggressions, of things like that, in terms of all kinds of sexualities and all kinds of life choices and other things, all of which are, I think, legitimate. I mean, it just isn't what I left. And it certainly isn't anything that you see in Korea or Myanmar. So, yeah, it's a very strange place to come back to after so long.
Cool.
As well as all of the political stuff, and I mean, you can look at that yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting times. And if somebody wants to visit Myanmar or Burma, what are your top recommendations for sightseeing and doing and eating?
And eating.
You've got to add that in there, right? The food is amazing.
Sightseeing. You can see something different every place. Well, I mean, it's the same, but it's different. It's a lot of old stuff every place. You do want to see Yangon. You want to see old downtown Yangon, not during the rainy season, because it does flood. But you do want to spend some time down there. I think you want to go to Mandalay. I did enjoy Mandalay a lot. Bagan is standard on everybody's list. Inlay Lake is just a nice, it's a nice getaway. It's in Shan State. It's in the mountains. It's cool. It kind of depends on what you want. I mean, if you want to go, it depends a little bit on how much time you have and how much you want to fly. The West Coast has some wonderful beaches, and down south there's some wonderful beaches and great diving. I didn't spend a whole lot of time there because it's not my thing. But I would say, you know, if there's any way to meet anyone, do it. I find it very invigorating and very life supporting, life affirming is probably the word. Eating, a lot of people do not like Myanmar food.
Really?
Yes, it's not hard to find Thai or Indian food. Myanmar is kind of in between them. A lot of curries on rice, but they're not the spicy curries. A lot of very thick kind of gravy-ish sauces. You know, because they'll let it sit and cook forever. The street side, cheap street side restaurants where you just kind of go point and they give you a couple of things over better rice. It's a wonderful place, wonderful way to eat, and cheap. and in that case, pretty safe. But yeah, you can have your choice of several different kinds of some kind of curry over rice. The naan in the tea house, you in the morning, if you can get their fresh naan, it's not exactly like an Indian naan, but it's basically the same thing. Is, you know, a nice fresh naan with a little cup of tea is a big treat. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I would say, yeah, go adventuresome with the food. I mean, it's nice thing is it's still so affordable. The food, at least, is so affordable. You know, you can hardly make a mistake.
What's not affordable there?
Transportation, well, flights are not, and that is the easiest way to get around the country is flying. Buses will take a long time. And there's also the kind of the private, it's not really the official bus, it's just the van that somebody runs. Those are a little bit more efficient if you if your heart doesn't give out. But yeah, flying I think is still expensive. One place I planned to go and I did not get there is down the east side to the Golden Rock and down to Pa'an, which is supposed to be a wonderful place. Also very culturally different, because there's so many different cultures in Myanmar. And I had a bus ticket to go from Yangon to there, and then I was going to go to Bangkok to fly out. And the bus company just said, no, it's raining and we can't get through.
Well, that's a shame.
And it was a big disappointment. Yeah, that was a disappointment. Anyway.
Any plans to go back?
No plans.
No, I mean, obviously not.
It would certainly, it would, if I had an excuse, yeah. Yeah, I would. I mean, assuming they open the country back up. It's closed right now. If anybody else goes, and especially if you want to do a motorcycle tour, I know a really good tour guide. Even without a motorcycle tour, he is a good tour guide. So, but yeah, I would go back if I had a chance or a reason or an excuse or a ticket.
Very cool.
So,
Well, I think we've taken more than an hour of your time.
mm.
But thank you so much for joining us today, Phil. We didn't even get to talk about your work as a spy.
It was not that exciting. It was not that exciting.
But maybe we can have you back sometime and we can delve into your other adventures in your other careers.
In my other careers, okay. If you run out of anybody else.
But it was very nice talking to you, Sean. Phil, don't leave. I'm just going to stop the recording. And thank you so much for joining us. And everybody who watched, thank you for watching.
Yes, and good luck to everybody out there that may actually be there. Okay.
Watching in the future. Yeah.
Or watching in the future.